Hey guys, Pete here. So it's been a couple weeks now, but we're all still thinking about the Twin Peaks finale, and what I decided to do today was put together a list and description of all the best theories that are out there. It's not all of them, it's not completely comprehensive, but these are the ones that had the most traction after the finale aired, and generally I think the ones that are put together the best, look at the things in a more realistic way, although none of them are perfect, and I don't expect that any of them are exactly right, but it's all good to think about, so we're going to do that. Real quick, I want to mention two things. The first thing is that I was really sad to see that Harry Dean Stanton, who played Carl Rodd, passed away. And I just wanted to recognize what a great actor he was and how much that's a sad loss for everybody. And the other thing is, stick around to the end because I have some announcements. One's about the book giveaway I have going on and some other things. So try to stay with me to the very end to find out about those. So the first theory that I'm going to look at was one that I don't necessarily like much, but I have seen a lot of people talking about it, and that's the idea that the whole thing was Laura Palmer's dream. In the end of part 18, as Carrie, we see Laura scream, and she does this after hearing a faint sound of Sarah Palmer yelling Laura, which was originally from the pilot episode. Sarah Palmer was calling after Laura. This was the morning after her death, so she wasn't in her room. So the idea here is that this whole Richard and Linda and Carrie Page reality is just something that Laura came up with. It's a dream, and it has to do with the trauma that she's experienced at her father's hand, who's inhabited by Bob, obviously. So if you think about it, if Cooper went back and saved her from being murdered, then she would still, she never ended up wrapped in plastic, so she would still be in that reality. And this whole thing basically comes to a close when her mother yells her name and she wakes up alive that morning. So this obviously, like most things do, ties back to the Monica Bellucci dream, and this would answer the question, who is the dreamer with Laura? And that it's a story about the terrible abuse that this girl has gone through, and in a way, this is a happy ending, sort of, because Cooper saves her from being killed, but in the end of the day, she would be where she was. Depending on how far back you look into it and try to make connections, then you could say that it's a different situation, but I don't know. I just don't think that was what this was about, but it could be, and a lot of people like it, so. The next one is probably my least favorite one, and that is that Richard is the actual dreamer. So when Agent Cooper wakes up after being with Diane, when they crossed over, he has this letter waiting for him that she left. Basically, she's gone. She doesn't recognize him anymore, and it's signed Linda, and it's referring to him as Richard. So we heard these things, and this is the main reason why I don't like this so much, is because the Giant mentioned Richard and Linda and going 430 miles and all of this stuff early on. So there we would have to have all of that stuff be the dream, and it would be Richard's dream. And depending on how you interpret it, Agent Cooper doesn't really ever exist. That's all in Richard's mind. So Richard could be an actual FBI agent, or he could just be some loser that has delusions of grandeur of being an FBI agent. And that kind of is supported with the way he acts there. But as I said in my other videos, I kind of think that there was a plan in place and they followed it. And that's how they ended up there. And maybe he loses some of himself when he's there, but at the end of the day, he's still Agent Cooper. The names are more an extension of the reality where they are. I don't know, though. I mean, a lot of people like this idea. It kind of wipes out the whole reality of everything we've seen. So, yeah, it's there. It kind of makes sense, but I'm not a big fan of it. The next one was the most hyped, but even though the idea that the last two episodes were intended to be synced and watched together was largely debunked by executive producer Sabrina Sutherland, the theory that started the idea was pretty interesting. I know from reading the comments and the different tweets I got on Twitter and replies and things that a lot of viewers were into this syncing idea. And by syncing, I mean watching part 17 and part 18, putting them in a viewer, lining up the timing, and then watching them both exactly at the same time. I watched a bit of it the first time without reading any of the theories around it, and it just didn't seem like it synced up at all on purpose to me. I mean, of course, if you watch anything together, things will work together, especially when you have an episode like 18 where there's a lot of downtime and a lot of long scenes. But I read the theories and they're not too bad. But once Sabrina answered that on her AMA on Reddit, that was not the intention. They weren't made to be shown that way. Based on what her job entails and the way that she worked so closely with David Lynch and Mark Frost, I just don't think that there's anything to the idea that they made these two parts to play together. But as mentioned, the original theory was still interesting, and it was written by Redditor Irivglad. And the idea here is that when Nato turns back to Diane in the sheriff's department, that is her returning from the Linda and Richard reality. And when Cooper sees her, he knows that they have successfully defeated Judy in that realm. Now, this is actually the end of the story, and it's a happy ending, if not a complicated one that involves a loop timeline, but it could make sense. It's definitely not perfect, though, as with all of these, and as it was expanded afterwards, whenever the idea of syncing the two parts together, as it was expanded, I thought it got a little less interesting. There was a lot of development in the theories where it tried to tie everything together, where every single thing was there for a reason and coincided with something else in the other part. And there it just got kind of muddied into, whatever. It wasn't as compelling as just the idea that we saw that they were successful because of the reaction of Cooper and the oddity of how that went down. And I think it's kind of interesting, that part of it. So many people like the whole thing, though, even though she said that it wasn't supposed to be synced. Some people believe it's still supposed to be synced. So if you want to read more about it, if you haven't looked at those posts, it's definitely worth a look. And I'll put links to all these in the description so you can check it out. Another one I'll mention before I get into my favorite one is one that actually came out before the finale aired. And after that, I'll go into the one that is actually my favorite one. This is a theory that was authored by the 1-3, and it boils down to the idea that there's 3 separate realities, which are the normal Twin Peaks, the Red Room, Lodge's, Mob Zone reality, and then our own reality in our world, like reality. It hinges on the idea that the show crosses over into our reality based on clues like the introduction of Eddie Vedder by his actual name rather than his stage name. The same MC in that part says Audrey's Dance rather than the name of the song, which is the title of the song in our world, not in the Twin Peaks television show. She didn't go to the jukebox and turn on Audrey's Dance. Gordon being David Lynch and his Monica Bellucci dream being with a real person, Monica Bellucci, at a real cafe near an art gallery where he had a real exhibition. You see, so there's these different parts where things touch our reality. And so this is a clue that the 1-3 uses to go on to say that Audrey sees our reality, that Gordon in his dream sees our reality, and that Monica Bellucci's question can be divided into 3 things. We are like the dreamer who dreams. The we in this sentence are us, the spectators who stare at the screen and dream of Twin Peaks with David Lynch. The second one, and then lives inside the dream, which is, for the devoted fans, doesn't feel like living inside a dream called Twin Peaks. That we spend the rest of our days glazed with dreamy eyes and do not know what to do with ourselves until the next part arrives. And then 3, but who is the dreamer? And that, of course, is us. The series is taking place in our collaborative dream, according to this guy. Twin Peaks itself constitutes one of the main themes this season. The series is a tulpa, the imaginary creation of us all. So this is kind of similar to what I was talking about in my personal experience with it. So I can relate to where he's going with this, but it's still not exactly... the problem I have with my own description of that is that's my experience based on the way I felt. and what I think that we all have as common feelings in relation to the show, which is great. But I think that one of the things that we have to keep in mind under the surface is that there was an actual story. David Lynch and Mark Frost sat down and wrote 18 episodes, or they wrote a script that became 18 episodes. So there was underlying themes that they touched on and fleshed out during the thing. So you have like the emotional side of our reaction, but then you also have like what were they actually trying to show us, all the while keeping it very open-ended so that we could make our own, we could draw our own conclusions. And so that brings us to the final theory. And I tend to prefer this to the others. Like I said, none of these are perfect, but this one is more from a storytelling perspective, which is, sort of beyond my scope. I've never been a writer. I've never even been a critic, to be honest. I'm just a fan and someone who appreciates art in this case. So this guy, David Auerbach, he wrote a post that's really kind of in-depth. I originally came across it because I saw Kyle MacLachlan he did a quote retweet on Twitter saying that it had some interesting ideas. So of course I clicked through it. Many other people read it as well, and they brought it up to me as being pretty good. So it starts out with the idea that the theory's author had was that Twin Peaks: The Return went far deeper than the original series. Before the finale came out, he expected that the new season would be about Twin Peaks, not the town, but the show itself. In other words, the show would wrap itself around the old show rather than continuing the actual plot. And like I said, this theory is pretty involved, but I'll do my best to simplify things, and I'll tell you that what grabs me is that it sort of expands on the idea I had based on my feelings of growing older and nostalgia and the fact that you can't go back and change things, and it puts it into the words of a writer rather than a fan. Does that make sense? So he talks about how this is the best surmise of the kind of submerged material Lynch built episode 18 on top of, and basically how they got from the script into the actual thing that we saw on screen. And the main thing here is that the alternate world that we see Richard and Linda in was not created by Judy herself, but by the White Lodge as a trap for Judy. And this starts to make a lot of sense because if Judy had set up that alternate dimension that we see Coop go into, she did a pretty bad job. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't seem in line with nobody's tricked except for Laura, which has been there for a long time. So she might have experienced the same thing that Cooper did, which was she forgot herself while she was there. And an underlying important part here is that Evil Coop and Bob are not the primary antagonists of season 3. Judy is. And we see Judy represented, or we actually see her in the flesh as the experiment, the mother, the bug symbols. Jeffrey says that, according to the author here. We see the jumping man where his face goes back and forth to Sarah Palmer, the Chalfonts, the Tremons. We have all this stuff that kind of leads us back to that idea that it is actually Judy that's the bad guy, not Evil Coop. And it kind of makes sense because how easily Evil Coop was defeated whenever it came down to his part being over. Cooper has some long-standing plan to deal with Judy that we know about through Gordon, and it appears that the giant/fireman's in on this as well. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the Black Lodge entities, including Judy, are attracted to pain and sorrow, also known as Garmonbozia, and they consume it. Plus, electricity is a fundamental energy like fire, which leads back to Hawk and what he told Frank Truman. So the idea is that the White Lodge, and there are hints of this because, and I talked about this in my 10 Things video for part 18, but there are hints about this based on what the giant shows Andy, and the fact that he tells Cooper to remember the plan basically by saying Richard and Linda 4:30, 2 birds with one stone. So the really simplified version is that the giant created this place. He actually puts Laura into it, and Laura herself attracts Judy into that dimension. The idea being that they want Judy over there so they can destroy her, because destroying her in our dimension or our reality might just destroy the whole thing. So if they set up this pocket reality, this pocket dimension, then they can destroy her there and all will be well in our regular world. So it's going to be a sacrifice, basically a suicide mission probably for Cooper and for Laura, who becomes, Cooper becomes Richard. Diane becomes Linda, who we don't know where she goes other than she leaves Cooper. And we have Laura turning into Carrie Page and barely remembering who she was, and maybe not remembering that, and probably collecting a lot of garmonbozia because the dead person in her living room shows that she's probably still suffering, just in a different way. And we see that the telephone poles outside her place. That could be a way that Judy is attracted or travels back and forth to collect this pain and sorrow. We see the white horse, which is a reminder of Judy as well. So there is a lot of stuff, and I don't want to talk about this for 20 minutes, so I'll let you check the link in the description. I'll put all of them in there, and you guys can decide what you think. But I think this makes the most sense to me because it takes the emotion of it away and looks at it from a storytelling perspective, which there's a lot of stuff here that talks about Hawk's map. There's a lot of stuff here that talks about other events related to the lodges and their collection of garmonbozia. So I don't know. Out of all of them, it seems the most likely to me, but I'm really interested to see what you guys think. So, as mentioned, I still have a book giveaway going on in my Patreon. We're going to get the winner. Anyone who joins, signs up, donates any amount. If you're active at the 31st of October when the book's released, I'll pick one of those names out of a hat and I'll send the book to you. We're going to cover that when the book comes out because it should be really interesting and bring up all kinds of new information. And the other thing I wanted to announce based on Patreon is it seems like everybody's interested in going back into the original series. So what I'm going to plan on doing is I'm going to do season 1. I'm going to start there and we'll see how it goes. Based on the signups I have over there now, I can afford to take a few days a month to work on that stuff and not have to worry about chasing views for anything else. So we'll do that, see how it goes, and if more people sign up, we can get through it faster. It just depends on what else is going on because I do have other, shows that I'm going to be doing as well. So there's that. Come over if you want to learn more about it. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Set up notifications. Mr. Robot season's coming. New Twin Peaks stuff will be coming. And I'll be continuing with my Game of Thrones stuff too. I have a whole series I've been working on there. So set up your notifications so you find out when they come out. One other thing I want to mention is that they did announce that the DVD set's coming out for season 3 in December. But the announcement came without an actual product link or anything yet that you can look at. So as soon as that comes out, I'll make sure that I add that in with the description in the other area where you can get like the final dossier pre-order and the older stuff and everything else. So that'll be coming ASAP. Follow me on Twitter. You can talk to me over there or on my Facebook or Instagram. And thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you soon.